have some place to go that's up rather than down, but it still leaves a lot of uncertainty.
Unfortunately, not to be critical of economists, they'll be 100% right 2 years after the fact. And it's very, very challenging to get there. I liken it to somebody today. It's like being in a submarine going down to wait to rest on the bottom, but not knowing how long you're going to be on the bottom. So even though you bottomed out, that may be for an extended period of time. And there only continues to be, anecdotal bad news. GM's closing X number of dealerships. So maybe somebody buying a car can get a deal on a car, but some number of people are probably going to lose jobs because facilities consolidate and close, and those dealerships are probably not going to be as profitable in the communities in terms of property tax. So there's all kinds of pieces, and I'd love to say it's bottomed out. Kind of go back up. I will say that the state just went out to the bond market, I think today, and we're hoping over 2 days to sell $600 million of bonds, doing a 300 and a 300 offering. They went all at once. The scary thing is that one of the best places I think to get information, and I haven't read it, but one of the people in my office read it, was on when you go to the bond market, you kind of have to do the full faith and disclosure piece, so like we have to really tell the truth, you're not talking with crash and others, and what the numbers really are, and saying that they predict $1 billion the governor just solved, but potentially as much as another $600 million the remainder of the fiscal year, which is pretty scary because there's not a lot of fiscal year left. And if you just took it from a rainy day fund, it would leave about $140 million, $170 million in the rainy day fund, having started the fiscal year at almost $2.3 billion. So we went for the piggy bank, or had to go for the piggy bank box, and smash open real quick. And that is, I think, one of the things to keep in mind. We have to keep in mind, and certainly the message here, and not that you haven't gotten or aren't acting accordingly, but any penny you don't have to spend this year that you can marshal towards next year or the year after, it's critical. Because as much as the federal money helps, to the extent we face whatever cliff this year, to the extent we just kind of go up a little bit higher, the cliff is just going to be that much higher down there in the out years. And I don't based on what I've read, the government didn't really want to do what we did on Chapter 70. I would say it's a byproduct of the expanded 9C authority that he was given in January. Otherwise, he couldn't have cut the Chapter 70 count. And that was part of our frustration because when we gave him the authority relationship, there was no plan. There was nothing that he was pointing to as how he was going to do it away with it. And that's frustrating. It's still frustrating.
Well, our basic plan is to go into town meeting with the lowest of the revenue plans or state aid plans. So right now it would be the Senate plan, and maybe that's going to be adjusted in the next week. At that point, can we be comfortable that that's a realistic number? Or are there other hurdles to jump before we...
I would say, I would just make two comments, and I don't want to get speak for the Senate, but I would make the comment that I think that there'll be some comfort level if you see like May's revenues meet at least the 5th time revised benchmark. I mean, it's getting to the point where pretty soon you should just say we're going to get $1 because then at least you'll exceed your benchmark. But it's a question of when you bottomed out. But I certainly would hope to be able to go to town meeting and say, going with the lower number is the responsible thing to do. But I'm hopeful the Senate number is going to come back up at least somewhat close to that number.
It will. It will have a recovery, but I would suggest that the number that comes out of the Senate is the best number that you're going to have before town meeting.
Okay.
And so it's not a perfect number, and obviously there's still some degree of uncertainty about where we're headed, but we all have to close our budgets and move along, and I think that's the best number that you're going to see.
With respect to, this is my understanding, and again, as I say, we get information from different places, that the schools, from a Chapter 70 point of view, are going to be held to the foundation level, assuming that there's enough federal dollars to fund it. So can we assume that is going to happen? My understanding is that the way that happens is the school, town finance files these grant requests or whatever you want to call it, paperwork. And that money is going to come directly from the federal government versus through state revenue. Is that true, or?
It's not going to be a state appropriation, but it may come from the state in the sense that the DES, the Department of Education, Secondary Education, doesn't. So it can be done as a pass-through.
Well, I'll give you an example of.
Apply them and
I'll give you an example. We set a school budget, and in the past, the school gets grants that are not part of the budget. They come directly from the federal government. They're like the IDEA. So we set a school budget number based on our state aid, and they have a significant shortfall. They go forward, and from a planning point of view, they have to make some assumptions about whether or not they're going to get to foundation. If we know they're going to get to foundation, it makes life a lot easier in terms of their planning, right? Because they're short by a substantial amount of money. Being short by that amount of money, come June, they will have to lay off teachers. When you lay off teachers, they're eligible for collecting unemployment the day school closes, or whatever the waiting period is. Even if that money comes in later, let's say they acknowledge that we get the money for September opening, we'll have paid unemployment benefits for that period of time. So timing, waiting for this money can actually cost us money. We can save money by getting it in, or knowing at least that we can count on it in advance.
I think it's going to be very unlikely to see a drop below foundation for any community, not the least of which are the legal vulnerability that would expose us to if under the Education Reform Act of 1993 we were to say that you have to spend at a particular level, but we weren't meeting foundation level.
And I think the federal statute requires that money be distributed initially to make sure that you're in compliance with.
Well, I mean, but North Reading has not been at foundation level. I mean, what was proposed was to bring us to foundation
Right.
level as a result of the federal stimulus package.
Right. So, but that continues to be true, that there is an overwhelming need to maintain every community at least foundation level. And one of the things that's occurring out there is that some communities who are above foundation will still be seeing a cut by virtue of the Senate budget if the Senate's Chapter 70 numbers prevail. It's not level funding, it's foundation level funding. And so the foundation, I think, is something that you can rely on. Anything above foundation that may come by virtue of anything, including federal stimulus, is not something that I would rely on.
So what you're implying is that there's some communities that are actually above foundation today, and they'll actually be cut down to
That's
foundation.
When we looked at the initial distribution of the federal money, some towns got zero increase because they were already going to be at
Right.
foundation.
Okay.
When the House did it, because we increased lottery and unrestricted local aid, we restored it to a level. Then what we put in as a recommended in the budget for the federal stimulus was to bring everybody up to foundation or $50 per pupil, so that way everybody would get some money from it. I think Bruce is right, though. You're going to see that change probably.
When we talk about foundation, though, that's basically some formula that's Massachusetts based, right? And I bring this up because it was a number of weeks ago there was a news report of some town in some other state, and I don't remember what it was, that was getting federal stimulus money even though they didn't need it, and they didn't even want it. Right? It was on the news, and in following up on that particular article, what I found out was that they were actually getting a distribution of the stimulus money already. And the way the federal government said, because we don't have time to figure out how to do this for all the states, we're going to adopt whatever the states use for foundation or whatever you want to call it. and as a result, they got their money. Now, why don't we have ours? I mean, what's with Massachusetts that we couldn't have provided that information sooner?
Let me
Yeah, I mean, what are we missing here?
Couple of quick points. One, the foundation budget that we use, I think is not different in its structure from what other states use. But I also want to make the point, because I know there's some folks here from Stanford Children that we've worked with and whose efforts we appreciate, that the foundation budget that we're using is inadequate to reflect the actual cost of educating a child in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in any particular locality. So it needs to be changed, but it is what it is. And there will be federal dollars in the pipeline. That's why the governor is counting on them, and counting on them to have them by the end of the fiscal year that we're currently in, so that you can make use of them. The other thing that's important to understand is there is a piece of legislation that we need to file or need to pass that changes some of the ways that we do business in order to be eligible for that federal stimulus funding. The bill went through the Committee on Economic Development, and we should have the bill passed very shortly. But there are rules that needed to be changed to comport with the federal requirements to be able to receive money.
So that's,
Pending.
but it's also been the roadblock to,
One of them.
I mean, there's more.
One of them. But I think it's fair to say that we will get our share with regard to Title I and IDEA. I think the questionable area is going to be, particularly in terms of some of the capital expenditures, how much we get and whether it's appropriate versus other states. That's where there's a lot of work to be done, and frankly, there's still a lot of questions. And it's awkward for us to come before you not being able to answer those questions, but we can't get answers in many cases ourselves. So it makes it tough, but we continue to try to pass on what we do know.
And that's why I said we're somewhat in the same boat as you, though, to talk to people about, like, why don't you have this solved, why don't you have a budget done yet? Because you don't have the answers to legitimate questions. We don't have the answers to legitimate questions. I think one of the things in your packet was a set of questions that had been developed from just talking to local officials that we gave to state stimulus czar and then the governor's DC office, and we only got them back the second day of the budget debate. Quite frankly, because we were talking about the DC office.
I've kind of occupied the entire time that you've been here so far. Board members, any questions?
Just in relation to some of the proposals put forth by the MMA, local officials, and there's a whole laundry list of suggestions as to reform, in quotes. Narrow it down. How many are actually going to be implemented, and what can we anticipate happening?
Can I start, first of all, Steve, by just thanking the town administrator for working with us to try to narrow down some of those things. I'm on the special commission for municipal relief, and that commission actually heard about 160 different ideas. If you take those 160 and you eliminate ones that are fairly duplicative, and you eliminate ones that actually have no chance of practical application, you wind up with something in the vicinity of 60 to 65 of those. One of the things that I've been trying to make sure that people understand, and I can see why it might not be clear from the report, which I'm very frustrated with, is that there were no votes taken about the recommendations in that report. There was no consensus developed about it. It was merely put out, and it was portrayed to us that it was going to be a compilation of all the ideas for further consideration. But when you read the report, you find words like recommend, endorse. That isn't the case. And so what's happening is there have been 2 hearings, public hearings, on all of the items in that bill. And again, not waiting for the public hearings, what we've done is reached out to Greg, and he's given us some suggestions on what things work and what things won't. In anticipation of the need that you have right now as we're doing the budget, we have filed a number of them in my office in the budget document for debate next week. And there are a number of them that I think are very important that have a good chance of passage. And I'll give you a couple of examples, and they range all over the board. One of them is to compel our folks at DOE or DESE and the Medicaid office to pursue even more vehemently than they have a different schedule of reimbursement for SPED services in our schools.